Hello there, everybody. It's Mike Yao with Savage Kingdoms role-playing game and Fire in the Head Productions. Thought I'd do another video in this little series that I'm kind of starting to do. The last one last week was about spellcasting and the magical arts and just magic and sorcery in general in the Savage Kingdoms 3rd edition role-playing game. This video will be about actions and action economy. So looking at breaking down little components of the game system now with the new Heroic Adventures book coming out. Just kind of tying it in with that. So maybe I can get some more traction on this YouTube channel. So please like, subscribe, share, and all that kind of stuff. And let's get going. All right, so on page 274 in the core rulebook, Savage Kingdoms 3rd edition core rulebook, here we go, page 274. And the chapter continues on until and well into the 280s, I believe. Well, yeah, I mean, it stops a little bit before that, but then it starts getting into overland travel and like sort of the broader use of the term action, including downtime activities or downtime actions. But let's start off with just talking about actions and combat. So, in Savage Kingdoms, once you roll initiative, everything kind of slows down, or actually probably speeds up narratively to where you have a 6-second phase of activity, just like in Dungeons and Dragons, particularly the last several editions. If you go back to D&D First Edition, it was 1-minute rounds, which is really crazy, but the way that you narrated it actually made more sense than what it seems like, but still, even back then when I was in my teens, I thought a minute was a little too long for a combat round. But anyway, it's neither here nor there. So Savage Kingdoms has a 6-second combat. If you look at Savage Kingdoms First Edition, I think I used 5-second combat rounds just to be different. So there were 12 rounds in a minute instead of 10. So by the time second edition of SK came out, which is the Reforged edition, basically it was edition 1.5, honestly, but people call it second edition. Which is why the new one's called third. I'm just kind of going along with it. I changed it back to 6 seconds. So here we are. So you get 2 actions in a Savage Kingdoms combat round. So if you look at it as 6-second rounds, each action is basically 3 seconds. It's not hard. It's not literally 3 seconds every single, but that's a good way to think about it. 2 to 3 seconds, maybe 4. Maybe your second action is only 2 seconds. Or whatever, however you need to justify that in your head and maybe even as your descriptions. So it's a 2-action economy. So in D&D 5th edition, to kind of use that as an example, you have 1 action, but you might be able to take a bonus action depending on your class. Sometimes your race might give you something like that as well. And sometimes just being a general character using 2 weapons, dual-wielding weapons would give you a bonus action regardless of your class if you wanted to attempt to strike with a offhanded weapon, for example, in D&D 5th edition. But normally it's a class-based thing that gives you a bonus action. So in Savage Kingdoms, we don't really have that. We just have 2 actions. So the caveat is only 1 action can be an attack type action. An attack is defined as pretty much in real life what it would really be is anything that's against your will, right? So casting a slumber spell is still an attack, even though it doesn't do any direct damage. It's not searing flesh from your bones or calling down a big bolt of lightning from the skies. It is still an attack because you are resisting it with a resolve roll. Even if you were to choose not to resist the slumber spell and you just want to give up and go to sleep before your enemy, it's still considered an attack, right? It is a force of will that's been enacted normally against the will of someone else. So that's an attack. The more obvious forms of attack are shooting an arrow at someone, slashing someone with an axe or a sword, grappling someone, pushing them down, pushing them over a cliff. Obviously, these are all acts of aggression and therefore are attacks. So if you were to cast a spell that was not an obvious attack, like say if you were trying to conjure fire upon your handheld weapon, that's not attacking the weapon. That's a willful thing that you're doing, right? And your weapon has no choice, so that's not an attack action. To spin it around, if you were to cast Fiery Blast, for example, to use another fire magic example, onto an opponent, that is an attack, right? Because you're directly attacking the person. They are opposing it with an acrobatics roll to get out of the way. In D&D terms, that would be a dexterity saving throw. In Savage Kingdoms 3rd edition, it's an acrobatics skill check done as an interaction or something. So yeah, so an attack is just attack action is literally something against the opponent's will. So you only do that one time in the round, so only one action. So therefore, it leaves your second action if this were combat, right? So that could be to move. In D&D 5th edition, it's just I don't even think it's really referred to as an action. I think it's just called a move or movement. So you could use that to move up to your mobility rating, which is a derived trait in Savage Kingdom's 3rd edition. Mobility is in yards. To remind everyone that Savage Kingdom's yards or ranges are in yards instead of feet. So if your mobility is 10, which is average, that means you're moving 10 yards or 30 feet as that one action. And you can see how that kind of blends into D&D 5th edition, which is 30 base speed for most races. So yeah, it's pretty comparable there. So how it gets a little different though, say if you want to spend both actions to move, that would be what's considered a run action, or in D&D it would be dash. Same thing, it's just different wording. Meaning that game mechanically you're moving twice your mobility. Right, so if your mobility is 10, you want to spend both actions to move. Therefore, running, maybe you could say describe it as a fast jog, which is probably really more realistically what it is. Then you would move double your mobility, right? So you'd move 20 yards in this case in 6 seconds, which is anybody with the most minute of athletic ability can do that. Although this is soon to be in combat, so you're moving a little faster, you're kind of ducking, and you're what's called tactical movement. However, in Savage Kingdom's 3rd edition, there is a sprint action. So you can sprint, which is 3 times your movement. As I held 2 fingers up for some reason. 3. 3 has always been awkward on fingers. 3. Why am I doing 3? Oh yeah, 3 times your base mobility. So therefore, you're sprinting in that case, right? So 10 mobility, using the same example, moving 3 times your base. That's 30 yards or 90 feet in 6 seconds. Again, fairly moderate athletic ability. I think in my prime, I used to run a 4.740, so I know that's easily doable. But again, it's tactical movement, right? So to sprint in Savage Kingdoms costs you a stamina point, but that's only in combat. So, and I forget this rule myself. If you're trying to sprint to the next to the village over 400 yards away to get a message to them very quickly, which is awesome. Seeing it's a really cool drama. I've had this happen, maybe once or twice in campaigns. And then, so every round that they're sprinting, I was charging the character a stamina point. I kept thinking, like, wait a minute. I know, like, when your adrenaline's up, you can sprint 400 yards, and yes, you'll be really tired, but you can do it, right? Most people, unless you're in horrible shape. So you can charge the 1 stamina to the character for doing that, but it's really supposed to be per combat. I think otherwise it's every minute of sprinting, like you're trying to get a message to the next village or whatever these classic fantasy tropes that quite often happen, or medieval tropes. So in or around combat, if you're sprinting, it does cost you a stamina point if you use all 2 actions for your mobility to sprint. If you're to moving ×2, which is run, there is no stamina charge. That's considered to be relatively easy to do, as I stated earlier. So there you go. Types of actions we'll get into really quickly. So like I said, the first type of action, one of the more common ones, is the attack action. This is any action that causes damage to another creature or forces a creature to do something against his or her will, which I just described, such as a slumber spell, which I literally described. A beguile spell is another one. Seems kind of harmless. You're appearing more friendly to the person. Your follow-up persuasion skill rolls are at +10 if the beguile spell works. It can be resisted by the opponent's resolve roll. And that's the key right there, because beguile can be resisted by someone that's considered an act of will upon an unwilling person. Therefore, it's an attack. You can only take 1 attack action, and you can already talk about that. You can spend a luck point to gain a 3rd action in combat. That is a legal use of a luck point. There's 7 or 8 different uses in the game. You can spend a luck point to gain a 3rd action. You can also get 3 actions if you critically succeed initiative. This goes back from a couple of videos back, but just bring it up again to tie it in with this video. Say you roll a 30 on your initiative roll because you have +10, or maybe you exploded a 20 and your reroll ended up putting you at 30, and your opponent has it roll a 10 for initiative, you would critically succeed in this case because it's 20 above the DL, in this case being the enemy's initiative number. The initiative roll, if the enemy rolled an 18, you'd have to get 38 to critically succeed. So critical success and initiative gives you 3 actions in the opening round and only the opening round of combat or other action scene using the initiative season system. So only that opening round. You can critically fail initiative 2, just like any other D20 roll in the system, any skill check or any other derived trait check, anything that uses a D20, even if it's a luck roll. You can critically succeed or critically fail. You critically fail in the system by scoring if you roll a natural 1 and the total result is 10 less than the DL, than the number that you need, that's a critical failure. Or if your total roll is a total modified result is a 0. I think I used the example before. Say you have -2 in a skill, and you're like, oh, I'm going to try alchemy anyway. I'm terrible at it. Probably a bad idea. And you roll a 2, and you have -2 in the skill. You now have a 0. That's a critical failure, regardless of what the DL was. So in this case, the DL, the difficulty level, would be the opponent again. So if they roll, say they roll a 12 on initiative, and you end up rolling, you got a natural 1, and your total was a 2 or 1. In other words, 10 less than what the DL was, in this case 12, that the opponent rolled. So that would be a critical failure. So a critical failure in initiative means you only gain 1 action in the opening round, just the opening round only. Then you get back in sync. Let's assume you kind of catch up to what's going on. You just get the 1 action. Good example is, remember waking up, if you're asleep, like at camp, you're camping in the middle of the night, or you're in an inn bedroom and something happens, or whatever. In any case, you're asleep. It does take an action to awaken, to wake up. Unless you have the light sleeper talent, you wake up as a free action. So that's kind of I want to bring that example up because that is a somewhat common scenario right there. So it does take an action to wake up. What's another? Cast a spell is an action that you can do. I guess it's an obvious one. You can cast. You only cast 1 spell per round. So if you succeed. However, the caveat is, and I may change this. I'm on the verge of house ruling my own game system. Is explained. I think it's in the core rulebook. It might be in the Savage East. Anyway, somewhere within the core system, it says that if you spend an action to cast a spell and the spell fails, which it can in Savage Kingdoms because it's a skill check like anything else magical arts roll, you can try again as your second action. So that's, from me, that's rules as written. I might house rule it. Now that I've mentioned it again, doesn't sound as bad. Anyway, so that's so you can still only cast 1 spell per round, but you can try twice. So if you fail the first action, and you can try again if it's a 1 action spell. Right? I think that sounds right. I think it is right. Never mind. I may not have done that. It sounds fine. All right, so cast spell, blah, blah, blah. Some spells take an action. Now, a few spells take 2 actions to cast. A few even take a minute. And then there's a ritualized version of any spell, which takes an entire hour to cast, right? So then we're well beyond the action system in that case. Let's say another action type, disengaging. So this is kind of interesting because in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, if you disengage as part of you disengage as your action, and then you can move your 30 feet or 25 or 35, whatever it is that your character happens to have. So in SK, it works kind of the same, but you have to spend an action to disengage. That's the 1 action, and then a second action to move. So you could attack, then disengage as the action, but it doesn't really do any good because you can't move after that unless you have a third action. Speaking of which, other than critting initiative in the opening round to gain 3 actions or to spend a luck point to gain a third action, there is a talent called Swift Actions, which allows you to gain it's a talent you have to learn, and I think you have to be +10 in initiative to even get it. The point being that you have to prove that you act very fast, right? Or you think very fast. And then you can only use that talent once per minute. So in most skirmish level combat, you're only going to use it the 1 time. I think it costs 2 stamina points, but it does give you that third action. If you're in like this big mass combat scene where it might span tens of minutes or even an hour or 2, like some of the larger medieval battles did in history, then maybe you would get to use that talent several times if you wanted to. But 98% of the time, you're probably going to get to use it once. So anyway, I wanted to bring that out. That is a way to get a third action in a combat round. So to reiterate, disengage will be one action, and then to move away from the opponent is your second action. All right, so dismount steed is an action. Dismounting from a horse or similar steed, or stepping from a cart or wagon, costs one action. However, with a successful DL15 animal handling roll, you can do this as a free action. So that's another thing for GMs to kind of remember. I actually remember this one pretty well, but I always forget what the DLs are, and I don't often like to look them up. I try to have it in my head as not to slow down the session. I think I was doing DL10, but anyway, it says DL15, so difficulty level 15. Meaning that if you're that skilled with animals and even wagons and carts, because they're pulled by animals traditionally, uh, that you're used to getting off of them very quickly. So if you make that skill roll, you can do it as a free action. You can, game masters, you could maybe hand wave that and just let it always happen as a free action. But I kind of feel like there's a little bit of skill involved there, and it gives even more use to an animal handling skill roll. But maybe lower the DL to 10 or something if you want. Otherwise, it's officially 15. Free attack. A free attack is known as a reactive attack. This is when a combatant leaves melee without tactically disengaging. See the disengaging above reading from the book. Granting an opponent's free attack. I don't know why I put it quotes in the book. If he or she so chooses, free reactive attacks are at a -2 penalty to attack rolls since the moment happens so quickly. So these are known as opportunity attacks in D&D 5th edition or attacks of opportunity in previous editions. Same thing here in SK. I'm just calling it something different. It's called a free attack or a free reactive attack because it's happening as a reaction. I kind of like the term, even though it's sort of long. I like it because it also tells the player immediately that it's a reaction, a reactive attack. You could just call it a reactive attack, not a free reactive attack. But all reactive attacks are at a -2 penalty in SK because it's assumed that it's happening so quick, you don't really have a good chance to aim. In D&D 5th edition, there's no penalty. In SK, there is a -2 penalty. I think it's slightly more realistic, but it can be a little hard to remember that sometimes. But anyway, there it is. You can only take one of those, just like in D&D 5th edition. You can only get the one reaction. You can only do it once. There is a talent, however, called Opportunistic Strike, which allows you to gain a second. You can actually do 2 free reactive attacks in the same round. I think the only caveat is you have to have a medium weapon or lighter. I don't think you can do it with a heavy weapon. I'm pretty sure, like a maul or a great axe. But with a spear, which is like to me the more obvious reactive attack type weapon because it has a little bit of reach, or war spear, pretty obvious. But even swords, which are fairly quick, and certainly daggers, they're pretty quick. It all makes sense. What's another action? Load crossbow. It takes one action to load a crossbow bolt, assuming the crossbow is already at hand and not stowed in, say, a saddlebag or the like. So, this is assuming you have the crossbow slung, you already have it out, you have it slung behind your shoulder, you have it hooked in your belt, something like that. If it's literally you're putting it in the saddlebag of your horse, then that would take another action to get that out, which makes sense because that's 2 or 3 seconds. Otherwise, it takes, and if you do have the crossbow ready, it still takes one action to load it and get it ready. Kind of it's realistic on the edge of you're really good as a crossbow. To put it in a more historical context, even a light crossbow, um, unless you were really used to using it, it took probably 10 seconds. It probably took 2 rounds, honestly, or nearly so, or 3 actions, probably a round and a half. Heavy crossbow would have taken much longer. That was with a foot Kranikin. If you were like this rare, super strong guy, you might have been able to do it without one of those, but that would have been an extremely rare example, and even then it still would have taken like 10, 15 seconds. All right, so that's the load crossbow. By the way, so knocking an arrow for an actual bow, like a short bow, long bow, she war bow, etc., is a free action. So it's always quiver to knock is like a half a second if you're any kind of decent archer. And like really skilled archers can do it even quicker than that. So it's assumed that you are smooth enough to do that. And even an amateur archer can knock an arrow in about 5 or 6 seconds. Now, granted, that's 2 actions in SK, but the point being that if you're reasonably gifted with a bow, it'll only really take you like a second to knock an arrow, and that technically is free action. Mount steed is another another option. For mounting a horse or other steed or wagon or cart costs 1 action. However, with a successful DL20 animal handling roll, you can do it as a free action. So it's kind of the opposite of dismount speed. This is mount speed. So to jump onto your horse, jump onto a cart or wagon. And I think I've been using lower DLs because for this I've been using difficulty level 15, and as written, it says DL 20. You could caveat it a little if you wanted a little more detail. I think I've done this before. If it's a more common animal like a horse, um, maybe a camel if you're from a culture that's like a desert culture that uses camels more. Maybe the DL is 5 lower to mount because that's an animal you're used to. So if you're trying to mount like jump a mammoth or something, that would conceivably be a little more complicated. It might take another second or two. So maybe that's the DL 20. But anyway, rules is written, DL 20. And there's a whole list of actions. I'm just going through a few. Um, you can do a tactical movement, already did that. Move, run, move, sprint. Okay, climbing. So if you use an action to move to climb, so climbing is 1/3 of your mobility, and there's a place on the character sheet. And the cool thing about 1/3, you can literally list it as 1/3 of the in yards for your base movement, or you can list it as the same number, but it's in feet, right? Because 3 feet to a yard. However you want to do it, just make sure you don't get them all mixed up there. Don't screw it up. So characters may attempt to move it to half. Wait, hold on. Yeah, climbing. Moving twice as amount costs 2 actions and may require DL10 athletics climbing, a specialty skill roll to gyms. All right, so if you want to move double that as 1 action, or no, actually it would take 2 actions. You could totally do so. So it's just like regular movement. If you spend double both actions climbing, then you can get obviously further. So if you tried, you can actually try to move up to your full mobility in climbing, like on the ground. Like if you want to climb super fast, there is an option to do so, but it is minus. It will require an athletics climbing skill roll. Moving twice as amount costs 2 actions. May require. Okay, so uh, move swimming. So if you're swimming, this form of movement represents moving through the water at least as deep as half the height of the swimmer. So in other words, even if the water's up to your waist, up to the character's waist, it still requires athletics, right? I know some people are like, "Well, I'm not really swimming; I'm wading through the water." You're still what would be considered swimming if you're up half. You're still moving through the water. You have to be kind of used to it. And in SK, it's still an athletics check anyway, right? Moving, athletic, strengthening your way, physiquing your way through the water is the same as swimming. The only difference would be if you have a specialty in swimming. Um, that's another +1 bonus. So yeah, still kind of the same thing there. If it's less lower in your waist, is that your knees? Then yeah, there's no like anybody can kind of walk through that. It just might slow you down a little bit. All right, so move stealthily. When utilizing the stealth skill, it is 1 action to move half one's mobility in yards. However, characters may attempt to move up to their full mobility at a -5 penalty. The stealth rolls is 1 action or no penalty for 2 actions. So, all right, so stealth, the default is assume that you're moving half your speed as 1 action. If you want to spend both actions stealthing, that would be your full speed and mobility, or 2 halves, same thing, right? You can try to go a little faster, so you can move up to like a run, but it's at -5 to your stealth roll. So sprinting, and I know this came up in the last session. I actually forgot. I applied a negative. I was like, you can sprint stealthily, but it's -10. Actually, there's no chance at all, which makes sense. There is a chance if you cast disappearance spell on yourself and are sprinting. I think that was what came up the last session live session that I ran. I think that's what it was actually, because they still can't see you, right? But they're probably going to hear like footsteps running by. But maybe there's a chance they don't put 2 and 2 together. Were those footsteps? Maybe I don't know. So that's what all that represents. You could knock an arrow as free action. I already told that. Persuade. All right. So the act of persuading another creature to do something such as surrender, listen to negotiations, flee, attack, or whatever. This costs at least 2 actions in combat, but in actuality could last as long as a minute to an hour or more, GM discretion. But if we're in an action scene or combat scene most of the time, um, to persuade someone in a non-intimidating way is 2 actions. Like, hey, let's negotiate, let's parlay. That's going to take a couple of actions. So, or to use persuasion for diplomacy or deception or bluffing or something like that, 2 actions. However, the caveat is if you're using persuasion to specifically intimidate, it only costs you one action, but it counts as an attack action since the target gets a resolve roll to resist the effects of intimidation condition, like we mentioned earlier. So you can do it in one action. The reason I consolidate the one action is because you could just like shout, slap your sword against your spear. It doesn't even have to be necessarily verbal. That can easily be done in 2-3 seconds, maybe even less. But it does require some actual commitment, right? So that's why it costs an action. And the opponent gets a resolve roll to resist the effects of intimidation. If they fail their resolve roll, they are intimidated. Intimidation is -2 to all their die rolls, mobility, and their defense until they get rid of the intimidation. The way you get rid of intimidation is you have to harm the creature or person that intimidated you to see that they're mortal, that they're bleeding. You're like, hey, I got a chance. Or be adjacent to someone who clearly damaged that being, and then it's gone. Otherwise, it's gone if you go out of sight of the creature or like an hour. But there's other conditions. But in the moment conditions, that's the best way to cure it. There are other talents and even spell like Aura of Majesty. If somebody an ally casted that can get rid of it as well. There are other ways to do it, but that's mostly the way to do it right there. Excellent. All right, so reaction, we already talked about that. Static actions. Oh yeah, static action is just things that are soon to be happening. Like when you're dodging or parrying an attack, let's say just using a static number, it's considered a static action. So you're doing stuff, but it's not. It's just kind of in the background, right? It's static. You can describe it, of course, but it doesn't really have a game mechanical thing. You can also use it. This is where I state you can use something called static perception. In D&D 5th edition, you have passive perception, which is 10 plus your perception skill modifier. Say you have like a 13 or something. You can also do that for Savage Kingdoms as well, which is same formula as 10 plus the overall modifier of the perception skill. So say you're +5 in perception, you would have a 15 static perception. So those are considered static action. All right, so what's a couple of other little things? The video here is at 26 minutes. I'll add a few more little things and then we'll end the video. Let's see. I want to go over a couple other little things that I've missed that might be helpful to you guys. Command a trained animal to attack is one action. I do have an asterisk down there, and I'm not quite sure why. I'm trying to find it. Yeah, it costs an action to command a trained animal to attack or do some other trained activity. So, the caveat to that is you can, if you have an animal companion that's close to you or that's trained in other tricks, and you're trying to make that animal do something more specific, then that's using an animal handling roll to see if the animal intuits. For example, say the animal's trained to attack, and now you want the animal to, you're like, I want my panther to attack, but not kill, just like drag the person down. Can I? It's kind of an attack, but it's kind of not. I would say make an animal handling roll, and usually it's around DL15 to see if they can intuit, unless you specifically train them to do that, like a knockdown tactic. That's a way to kind of adjudicate things that are just a little above what might be normal. Are my animals trained to perform to gain trinkets or money or whatever, but I wanted to perform something more specific tonight in the inn or in the town square or whatever. So that might be an animal handling roll. So yeah, it's a way to adjudicate it. But anyway, it's one action in combat. Disengage or dismount a horse. Establishing a grappling hold is one action. Okay, here's a good little example that comes up. It's kind of clear. That was a little unclear. I made it more clear in SK 3rd edition. So if you grapple another person, you wrestle them, put them in a grappling hold. A wrestling hold / grappling hold, same thing. That is one action to do that. It's the brawling skill, obviously. Using the grappling specialty if your character happens to that. So for that person to break out, costs them what am I trying to get? Oh, it costs them 2 actions. So it would cost both action to break from the hold. So here's the way it works in SK. If you're trying to break the hold of a actual living opponent who's willfully trying to grapple you and wrestle you and maybe take you down or maybe do some damage or whatever, it takes 2 actions to break out. So it's a brawling roll to oppose brawling roll. If you succeed, that took both actions, but at least you're out. If you're grappled by an inanimate object, it sounds kind of weird, but like you're in a net, like a net falls you on a net trap or something like that, or you get entangled in some seaweed, or maybe a bunch of tree limbs, something more mundane that's not actively like grappling you and trying to do damage. That's only one action to break out of. So, two reasons for that. One, I think it's a little more realistic, a little more believable, more narratively believable. But also number two, game mechanically, if you were to allow one action to break free of someone attacking you, that person with that second action could immediately attack back, and it just seems kind of, I don't know, it seems kind of weird. And I think there's ways around that. I think if you have 7 levels in brawling, or maybe it's 10 skill levels, I think you can break out as one action. So there are ways around that, but basically that's how it works. And then breaking out of something that's like a net or something seems like you would have a few seconds left to do something else, like move away or do something else. So that's the thinking behind that. So yeah, so I got that cleared up. Making a lore skill roll regarding a creature. So in D&D 5th edition, if somebody wants to know what a creature is or something, I usually let them do it as a bonus action for their nature check or arcana check or religion check, or whatever it is. So to do what's called a lore, because there is a lore skill in SK 3rd edition, it does cost an action. So if somebody's like, I want to see if I know anything about this creature, what its weaknesses are. And the way that's, because I feel like you would probably take a second or two to kind of bring up this knowledge. And if you're going to shout some of the stuff that you might have learned if you succeeded on the lore skill against whatever DL it is, that would take even a couple more seconds. So that's why it costs an action. I would not allow that as a free action. Honestly, that's giving up too much stuff for free, and people would just do it all the time. And also remember, lore. Creatures and monsters, supernatural things, are a little more rare in this setting than they are, say, the typical D&D 5th edition setting. So you should have to work for it a little bit more. That's why the DLs to know stuff about certain creatures are a good bit higher than, say, D&D 5th edition typically is. Pick a simple lock, cost an action. Pick a moderate lock is 2 actions. Pick an advanced lock is 1 minute. So there you go. And I think the DLs for that are basically simple is 15, like moderate is 20 and above. Advanced lock is like 20, DLs 25 and above. And usually they're around 30, honestly. Pilfer a simple item is 1 action. Pilfer a well-guarded difficult item might be 2 actions. Pull out an object from a bell pouch is 0 actions. There is a asterisk. These actions are free, although, oh yeah, that's a good time to bring this up. So as you can tell in the system, we have free actions. 2 free actions equal an action. So for example, that example right there was pulling an item out of a belt pouch. Belt pouch being real handy. That's the point of having a belt pouch. But if you're to grab 2 things out, that would cost an action, right? Because that's 2 free actions. That would cost 1 action. Or to pull something out of the belt pouch and then put it back, because that's, again, 2 free actions equals 1 action in SK. So there you go. And I think it's kind of like that in D&D 5th edition. I don't know if it's spelled out quite as eloquently, to be honest, but it's called what is called an item interaction, free item interaction action, or something like that. It's kind of the same thing, and you really only get one of those for free too. So it's pretty similar, actually. Let's see. Pull out an object from a backpack. Would, for example, might cost an action. Ride a horse at a full gallop is 2 actions, because it's the same as like moving on a. Riding a horse at a canter is so a canter is double mobility. I'm using horse equestrian terminology here. And then riding a horse at a gallop is the horse going triple its mobility. Both of those take 2 actions because you're spending both your actions just moving. Okay, search a 1 square yard area takes 1 action. Search a 3 square yard area takes 2 actions. And then in parentheses, I put 1 round for some reason. Oh no, okay, two actions is 1 round, obviously. Search a 10 square yard area is 1 minute, which is 10 rounds. Like if combat was still going on around you or something. All right, here's another good one. Standing up from prone. So prone means knocked on your butt, right? Not necessarily on your butt, but flat on the ground. So it takes an action to stand up from prone from a prone position in SK. I think in D&D 5th edition it just costs 15 feet of your movement. Just kind of a cool idea. I feel like it's a little light, which is why I charge an action for it. I think it's a bigger deal than people might assume. There is a talent called kip, though. I don't know if you know the term kip, where you kip up, you're on the ground and you like flip yourself up. I used to do it when I was younger. Now I would probably tear 4 muscles. So you kip up to your feet. You're like in a guarded position. So if you have that talent, you can do it for free as a free action. It doesn't cost you the one action that it normally would. The difference is, though, any opponents nearby still get a free reactive attack, even if you have the kip talent. So just know that they can still, which makes sense. I'm sorry if I'm fighting someone, the guy's like all fan, I'm still easily got a shot at him. Sorry. Uh, so that's why. But remember, free reactive attacks are a -2 penalty. Just moving stealthily, I already mentioned that. Swimming, throwing out. So something like throwing an alchemical concoction costs one action and is an attack action. I guess it's obvious. It's like any kind of ranged attack. Preparing an alchemical concoction might actually cost you a second. That's kind of left open. So, for example, Pardonian Fire, to have it. Actually, there's nothing. I don't know. It's probably going to be a GM discretion thing. There might be you might need an extra round to prepare an alchemical concoction and then a second action to throw it. But usually it's just going to be one action. Staunch a bleeding wound cost. Yeah, it says complete round, so it costs two actions. It costs the entire round. Because it does take a while. I think in D&D 5th edition, it's just an action, which means like it's 3 or 4 seconds, and that's fine. But I really think to really get the strips, really, I think it would cost at least 6 seconds. So 2 actions right there. I think it's it. I think it's it for all the action stuff. Leave any comments, or if you want me to cover any other type of actions that I haven't. Gosh, I hope I haven't missed anything obvious. I don't think so. Attack, cast a spell, stealth, movement, a lot of that stuff. Picking an item, picking a pocket, picking a lock. Yeah, and there's a whole chart on page 275 in the core rule book. Escape core rule book right there. And that kind of covers all of that stuff. And beyond that, a lot of it's pretty intuitive. You guys will probably figure it out, particularly your game master. So have fun with that. Anyway, this is about actions, particularly actions in combat in Savage Kingdom 3rd Edition. Like and share and subscribe. I think I already said all that stuff. Thanks, you guys, if you got to the end of this, and I'll talk to you guys again soon.